There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode 364. And today in the show, we've got Dan Infalt back with us, and today we're running through the What Would You Do gauntlet of hypothetical deer hunting scenarios. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Onyx. Today we're back with our third installment of this What Would So-and-so Do format series of sorts. It's this new idea that I started a few weeks ago, as you've heard me discuss, in which I'm trying to find new ways to get inside the minds of some of the best deer hunters in the country, right? We've been doing this for 7 years. We've talked to hundreds of different deer hunters. There's hundreds of different deer hunting podcasts out there now, and a lot of it's the kind of same thing. So how can we get to that next level? That's what I'm wondering. And that's what this story, this situational type approach attempts to do. If you haven't listened to the last couple episodes with John Eberhardt or Steve Bartilla, here's the gist. Basically, I'm going to present our guest, today it's Dan Infalt, with a hypothetical scenario. And then I'm going to ask him to explain what he would do and why he would do it. Now, Dan is probably familiar to a lot of you. He's been on the show, I think, 3 different times, and he's just well known across many other platforms. He is the founder of the Hunting Beast forum and YouTube channel, Hunting Beast Gear. He's been all over the place. He's really popularized much of the strategy around hunting buck beds and how you can really form your whole hunting premise around that. So if you are into hunting beds, if you're wanting to better understand buck bedding areas, if you're interested in hunting hill country or swamp country, all these things are things that Dan really specializes in. He's a tremendous resource. If you have not heard our first couple episodes with him, I would recommend listening to those first, because that's where we kind of cover off on his basic things. Like, that's where we get to understand how he thinks about hill country bedding, what he thinks about swamp bedding, what he thinks about how you can predict where these bedding locations are and how to properly scout and things like that. That's where you get the foundational stuff. I kind of assume that knowledge in this conversation. And so I start asking Dan kind of the next level questions. I put out that scenario, and then I ask, what would you do if I put you with this slight variation or that slight variation? So having the background will help you. That said, you don't have to do that. You can listen, and you're probably going to still get a lot from today too. But go back and search for Dan Infalt in the Wired to Hunt archives. He was in one of the first couple episodes, and then he came back on again the following year in 2015. And then finally he was on, I think 2 summers ago. I brought him on, and Andy May and Joe Elsinger helped me ask a bunch of questions, and that was really helpful too. So today we cover a lot of different ground. We dive into some different approaches Dan has to hunting farm ground. We do talk about swamp and hill country bedding. We examine some different scenarios with how Dan handles hunting pressure in different situations where other people mess up his hunts or where he messes up his hunts. I do ask him some of the same questions I asked John and Steve, so it's interesting to compare their responses. And just in general, I think this one is fascinating. It ended up being just as good as I was hoping it was going to be. I hope you enjoy it. I think we'll just get right into it, let you enjoy this one. We're going to do at least one more of these What Would You Do podcasts with someone very different. My goal here was to have like two guys that were very public land focused and two guys that have a little bit more of a management set of experiences, so we can compare and contrast those two styles. And I think it's going to be helpful. So with that all out of the way, I just want to mention one more thing, and that is just, every once in a while, I want to make sure to thank everybody in the front of the episode for listening. I always mention it at the end, but maybe some of you shut it off before then. So I just want to say, hey, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you picking up copies of my book, That Wild Country. I appreciate you guys following Wired to Hunt on social media and engaging and commenting and, sending me messages and feedback, all of that stuff. It's amazing. I appreciate it. It makes this whole thing a community, and that's a special thing. And I think that those of you that listen and that are part of this Wired Hunt community, you guys and girls are just some of the coolest hunters out there as far as I'm concerned. And I'm just glad to be able to do this thing called life and hunting with you guys here at least once a week on the show. So thanks for all that. I will also thank you for bearing with the advertisements, right? We have got to do these ads in the podcast. I know that's annoying. I bring this up, and I know I've brought this up before. I bring it up because it's something that can be annoying to me too, right? I know listen to a show, I'm enjoying it, and all of a sudden someone busts in with a life insurance ad. That's like, really? I feel that way too. I get it. It's just kind of what you got to do to keep these things on the air these days. And so thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for smiling and laughing along when you hear me pitching you on some new thing. It is what it is. I'm doing my best to keep this stuff interesting, to give you lots and lots of value for free. And thanks for coming along for the ride for the rest of it. So that is out of the way. I've talked for too long. I know you want to hear from Dan Infalt. So let's get right to it with our conversation with Dan Infalt. And we're going to figure out, what would Dan Infalt do? All right, back with me on the line, we've got the one and only Dan Infalt. Dan, thank you for hopping on the show again.
Yeah, no problem.
We were just talking a second ago about, how times have changed a little bit for you and what I've got going on over here. And gosh, I think the first time I had you on the podcast was one of the first maybe 5 or episodes of Wired Hunt ever. So that would have been back in 2014. So that was 7 years ago that we did our first podcast together, which is kind of crazy how fast that whole time period's gone. But since
I didn't even realize it was that long.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Since that point, How many different podcast episodes do you think you've done? Because you've been on our show, I think 5 times, 4 or 5 times. But I know there's been 8 billion different podcasts out there. How many interviews like this have you had to do by now?
I don't know. I usually say yes if somebody asks me, if I have time, and I probably end up on at least one a week.
Wow. That's amazing. People definitely don't realize what a commitment that is. Like how generous you are with your time to do that. That's substantial. Thank you, Dan, for not only doing my podcast, but for doing everybody else's too, because I'm sure a lot of people are benefiting from that. That is funny though, because it perfectly fits into my idea for today's show, because I've been thinking a lot lately about how, I've been doing this podcast for 7 years, and since that, there's been all sorts of other podcasts that have started up, and everyone's chatting with everyone, and I've been trying to figure out new ways to kind of dig into that next level. How can we learn something new from people, even if we've talked to them before? How do we kind of dig in even deeper? And the idea I had was to start focusing more on specific scenarios. So I've started to do a kind of a what would so-and-so do series. That meaning, basically, I'll get someone like you on, and we've had a handful of other people already. I'm going to do a few more folks after you, in which our whole chat is going to be specific situations. So I'm going to paint you a picture. Like, it's this date, it's this time of month, and this is the scenario. What would you do? And so I'm going to throw out a bunch of hypotheticals. And then what I'm hoping you can do is explain to me what you would do and why you would do that. What's your thought process? How would you do it? And then we'll kind of dig in from there. It'll be kind of a starting point to talk about a whole bunch of different things. But I think that'd make for an interesting and different kind of conversation, and maybe a more interesting one for you too, after having done so many of these. Does that sound interesting to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way questions are asked make or break a podcast, obviously. And being on a lot of them, I noticed a lot of people just ask you the same questions over and over again, and it's pretty boring.
Yes.
You know, you've always done a really good job of mixing things up. I always have fun coming on with you because I never know what to expect.
Good. Well, that's what I want. I'm going to try to keep you on your toes on this one too. So good. I'm excited for it too. I've been trying to go back and watch some of the old videos, and I've been reading some old threads. I've been looking back at old things we've talked about, and kind of just got a whole bunch of different ideas and situations percolating, as well as some situations that I've been in personally, or even some of my friends, some folks that are Hunting Beast, very active Hunting Beast members. We've kind of all put together a bunch of different situations that we're going to throw you in and see what you do. So I'm thinking we should just jump into it if you're ready to rock.
I'm ready.
All right. So we're going to start kind of right now. As we're talking, it's August 3rd. So let's say tonight, if you had time after we stop talking, you decide that you're going to go out driving around, just kind of doing some general glassing. Maybe after dark, you'll do a little bit of shining. And you get out and you're within the ballpark of some public land, but not right next to it. Maybe you're about a mile or so away from the nearest public land, and you glass up a truly world-class buck. Like a 200-some-inch deer, something that is not normal to see. And right away, you see him, you see where he's at. He's on private, but there is public about a mile away. In this scenario, on August 3rd, what do you do? Do you immediately seek permission on that private land, or do you go and try to focus on, could he possibly be in that public? Kind of what's your next steps over the next couple of days if you decide, like, hey, I really want to try to get a chance at this deer?
Well, I've been in that situation a few times, and usually it involves a little of everything you just said. I mean, you try to gain permission without putting a spotlight of why you want to hunt there. Because deer like that cause a lot of attention, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I'm also going to keep an eye on them, monitor them. So I'm going to start looking for that deer. I'm going to shift my efforts to that area, shine around, glass around, and try to put together, is he going on any other farms? Is he going on to the public? Is he going in that direction? In some cases, a deer like that's an impossible deer to hunt. He never leaves the area that he's on. And the reason he's that big is because they don't allow hunting or something like that. But in a lot of cases, they will have enough of a travel room where they do go onto the public a little bit, or they go onto some small property off to the side where you have a little bit at them. And then it's that cat and mouse thing where you got to be careful about when you go in after him. If he's staying on a property you really don't have access to, just coming over every now and then, too much pressure is going to put him over there all the time. So a lot of that's watching from a distance. But really, my main plan would be to keep an eye on that deer. And if I'm not finding him, just keep monitoring all the fields around there, working my way out until I find him again, and just keeping track of where I'm seeing him and, where he's tending to go. And in Wisconsin here, I can shine. So I would be shining him at all different hours of the night, trying to catch him in the morning, try to catch him in the middle of the night, try to catch him in the evening, without really putting too much pressure on him with the shining either, because that makes him go back further or stay hidden a little more. But just getting a glimpse here and there and keeping tabs and really getting the pattern going.
if, I know when it comes to shining, right, you're at night, you're doing that at night. Well, maybe I take that back. I guess I'll just stick with my question, which is, how do you keep tabs on a deer like that without drawing attention to it? Because if you're trying to glass in the evenings, or even if you're driving by at night and stopping for a minute or so, inevitably there's that worry someone's going to see you, someone's going to wonder, why is there this blue pickup truck pulled off the side of the road? How do you try to minimize that? Because like you said, you don't want word to get out that this deer's out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways. I mean, most of the time when I find a real big buck like that, it's not real close to traffic. So you do get away with a little, and I just make sure that I'm not shining, not glassing, not doing anything when somebody drives by. Mm-hmm. I don't drive around in a truck with stickers all over it about hunting. In a lot of cases, I use one of the cars that we have that has no stickers that doesn't look like a hunting vehicle, and I don't dress like a hunter when I'm out looking at deer. Sometimes in the past, one real big deer I got was hanging right next to a public land parking lot. I had a station wagon at the time. I mean, it's been talked about a lot. I had I-brake for raccoon stickers on it and stuff. I'd park in that parking lot. I make believe I'm reading the paper when I'd monitor that buck. Whenever somebody come in there, I just pick the paper up and look at it. But it does take being a little covert and careful.
Yeah. That's a fine line to try to walk between getting the intel and possibly overdoing it, though. Now, let's say you mentioned sometimes they've got this travel. They travel enough that maybe he would dip into the edge of that public. What would you do to try to determine that? Would you just go and actually walk that piece of public that's closest and look for incredible sign there, or put cameras there and just kind of hope that maybe that happens to be? Or is there anything else different you would do specifically to try to ascertain if he's on public at all?
Well, if it's public, I know, and near my home, a lot of times it is. I'll know the bedding areas and stuff, and I might just throw some hunts at it anyways, knowing he's in the area. Know where mature bucks go when they go over there. But in a lot of cases, it is trying to catch him, see him crossing the road or going over there or something. In some cases, I'll drop a camera. Usually if I'm dropping one at this time of the year, it's a cell cam, because if you're going and checking it, you're blowing it. You get one crack, get in there and drop the camera and don't go back. And then if he's coming across a main crossing coming out of that property or something, hopefully you can get capture some sort of image of him in a time frame. But it's really trying to catch him going over there and knowing that he's over there. So you're not wasting your time. But if he's that big, and I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of guys listening right now probably can't shine. There's only a few states where you can. And glassing, a lot of times those big bucks don't come into open areas in daylight. So you got to throw a camera at it, or you got to throw a hunt at it. And just try. I mean, I would rather throw a hunt at a possibility that a 200-incher might be coming across the road over there than to go hunt a known 140, So why not? I mean, just throw some hunts at it. Worst thing can happen is you don't get a deer.
Yeah. So I know some guys that have been in a situation like this, and they'll spot a deer somewhere like this, and then they will look at a radius of like a mile about and try to get a hold of every single landowner they possibly can within that mile and see if they can get permission. Will you ever ask that many people for permission, or is it more so like you find the best property and you're willing to put in the time to try to get permission there? I guess how much are you willing to try to get access to private in that kind of situation, and how do you do that?
Usually I don't ask a lot of permission. If I do, it's because I'm seeing a buck right on a property. Most of my hunting is on public, or it's on somebody's property where I'm invited. I don't usually ask, but I do if I'm seeing one on it, but I don't do that whole ask all the neighbors and all that stuff usually. No.
Okay.
I have to know that the buck's going over there before I would even put myself through that headache.
I feel you there. I agree with you there. Okay. Let's fast forward a little bit, and maybe we just keep on playing this scenario. It's opening day in Wisconsin, September 15th, right?
Yep.
Okay. So it's the night before opening day. So September 14th. On a typical September 14th evening, and maybe this particular one with this world-class deer somewhere, what are you doing on the night before opening day, and why and how are you doing it? Is it something, I'm assuming it's some kind of scouting or something, or do you take the night off and prepare yourself for hunting season, or what do you do the night before?
Usually, if I was onto something really big and I was seeing them on a regular basis, I'd probably go check on them for sure. And I'd probably look around and see if anybody else is watching or anything like that, and just kind of, do a drive-by. But really, usually the day before hunting season, I'm kissing my old lady's ass because I'm not going to see her for 4 months. She's not going to be too happy with it.
Yeah, smart man.
Maybe Thursday I'm scouting a little harder.
Okay. That's smart. Okay, that might be the best advice we get all night here. Okay, so I got one more kind of jumping off of that, because a buddy of mine had a question that I think relates to this. Let's keep with our hypothetical 200 incher. And let's say that now you actually do have permission on a property what this buck is living on. So the property is about 200 acres of private land. You were invited to hunt it by a friend. It's a mixture of farm ground, some thick brush, and a small swamp with multiple quality bedding locations scattered throughout. And there's this legit world-class deer out there. How would your hunting style, once the season opened, how would your hunting style differ if you were the only one who had access to the farm versus if 10 other guys also got invited? So 10 other guys are hunting the 200 acres with you versus just you had access to it. How would you hunt it differently as the season progressed? How would your style change?
I don't think the pressure makes a huge difference to me. Actually, if the deer actually lives there, I think the pressure helps me. Now, if the pressure pushes the deer off the property, I think it hurts me. But actual pressure in a spot where I'm hunting, if it's not kicking the deer out of there, I think helps me, because I think it makes a deer follow the rules. You see deer in unpressured areas where they bed a little easier, and up on higher ground, a little further out from where they normally do, they get a little laxed, and you go walk in to hunt some bedding area and kick them out 50 yards before you to the bedding area, where normally it would be satellite bucks. So actually it gets a little harder with no pressure sometimes, but my actual style of hunting probably wouldn't change at all. I would still be very aggressive. I don't think any buck gets to be 200 inches by running around in daylight all over the place. Yeah. Not unpressured or private, So for me, it's still a matter of inches getting in close. And I would say those other 10 people, if they're your average hunters, pretty much all of them are probably hunting set stands, and they're just probably worried about me hunting in their corner of the field or something where I'm just going to skirt around them and go to the edges of those swamps and really hit the points going out there and stuff. And the spots where a big buck should be bedding, I'll be looking for sign coming out, setting up and hunting, and then the next day moving if I didn't see it. And I'm going to hunt that property down until I see that buck or get on him.
Now, would that be any different at all if the hunting pressure wasn't on you at all, but you did have this extreme pressure on the outside? So let's say all the neighboring properties have got a lot of pressure, but they're good hunters. We're going to say they're not just your average ho-hum, but they know what they're doing. They listen. Maybe they're members of the Hunting Beast. Maybe they've listened to the Wired Hunt podcast. They know what to do. At least they know what to do. I'm not saying they do the right thing all the time, but at least they know what to do. And they're hunting the edges, and they know about this buck too. In that case, would you do the exact same thing, or would you be a little bit more conservative now? How would that switch it up at all?
Well, I would, I think I'd still hunt the same. I think you got to get in there. When I hunt, everybody thinks it's so aggressive that going in, close to these bedding areas is really super aggressive. But you got to remember, I go in there once, I slide out, and then I move, and I'm someplace else. And I don't think I hunt those places overly aggressive, for the most part, in my eyes. And I think if you don't take a shot, I think a lot of guys are so worried about kicking a deer off of a property that they never give them a chance to kill it. They sit back too much. I really think that the aggressiveness is what gets me the action. And it's whether there's other hunters or not surrounding that property. That deer, me pushing it off onto another property could mean somebody else kills it. And I've had that happen to me. But I've also gone in and killed deer. And I think it's worth the risk, because I think if you don't go in there and spook a field deer or have a neighbor kill one on you or something, you're probably not hunting hard enough.
Yeah.
Sitting back too much, it's a catch-22. I've been on really well-managed ranches and seen where big bucks move around in daylight pretty easy, but for the most part, most of the stuff that most of your average listeners have, if they don't get aggressive, they're never going to get a chance. And they'll see guys on TV that are on this big ranches sitting back on field edges and stuff. And it's not too often in the areas where I hunt, you see a big buck on a field edge. I mean, it happens, but not too often. And if you do, it's usually a younger buck that's got a bigger rack. The mature bucks just don't come out like that. You got to get aggressive. You got to go in there after them. Most of the huge bucks that I've killed within 150, 200 yards of the bedding area, most of the time closer. And I'm shooting them at closing time. So, I mean, if you're kicking too far back because you're afraid of kicking it on the neighbors, you're just not going to see that deer. And I think you're still putting the pressure on. If you're back, 400 yards, the buck's going to get out there, smell that you're there. And now he's going to come out even later. He's going to come out smarter. It's like slapping him on the ass and saying, game on, I'm hunting you. I want the first time that he has an opportunity to smell me if he comes out of that bedding area, he gets an arrow through him.
Mm-hmm. So does that make
I'm moving in right away.
Yeah. So that kind of makes me wonder, though, right? I think you've talked about sometimes like hunting your way in, as you'll try and get close, and then maybe you spot him or you learn something, and you move in 68 or 60 yards closer, something like that. Is there sometimes a time when you should actually just go all the way for the home run, go right to the edge, because that, like you just said,
well, it matters what you have for intel.
Yeah.
There's spots where I'm unsure of something. I try to find a situation where I can sit back where I don't think that deer is going to get to where I am. It's not going to smell where I was. The wind's going to be right, where I can watch an area, see what happens, and then move in for a kill if I need to. And I've had, and like if I'm hunting a spot that, I'm real unsure of, kind of, but I got a planned area I'm hunting, I never walk that trail. I don't take that, that cut path from point A to point B. I always plan out a route and try to scout my way in and find fresh sign. You find fresh sign coming out of something that looks like bedding, I'll set right up on it. And I've done okay doing that. A lot of times I don't make it to where I was planning on going. But I'm still, hunting that aggressive, making my way in there. And that whole hunt your way in thing, what I mean by that is don't walk through a bedding area to hunt a bedding area you think might be a little bit better. You might want to hunt point A before you walk past it and ruin it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
That's part of that hunting your way in thing.
Yep, that makes sense. Kind of related to all this, I've heard you talking, about people that maybe own a small farm and how there's this temptation. I think you could probably say this temptation that you want to hunt it as often as you can, or whenever you have the chance to hunt it, you should hunt it because you've got all this money dumped into it, right? You bought this farm, you've put in all this time and effort, you want to enjoy it, so you want to do it. But your recommendation in this, I think it was one of your videos I was watching, you'd said, hey, why don't you go throw some hunts at the public land and just hunt your private sparingly at the right times with the right conditions, and then you'll actually get more out of that hunt than you would otherwise with 15 hunts. And so you talked about, scattering your hunts from public, other properties. And I know that with your own personal hunting, you bounce to a lot of different places. As it is described, you'll be aggressive, but it's a one time in maybe, and then off to another place. Would you, or I guess let me say this. What would it look like for you, though, if you happened to become one of these people I just described? Let's say someone let's say we've got a listener, or no, we've got a viewer of the Hunting Beast YouTube channel, and you've been so helpful to him that he decides he's going to give you a 60-acre piece of ground as a thank you gift. He gifts you 60 acres of prime ground, Dan. Now you are a private property owner, and you also have all the public land you can hunt too. How would you personally mix that into your schedule? Would you say, well, I got a 60-acre piece now. Would you do things differently, or would you still just hunt your own personal piece of property a couple times a year and spend the rest of it everywhere else? How would you do that? How would you figure that out?
Well, I kind of have that scenario. I think the property's 70 acres, so not 60, but I don't own it. A good friend owns it, and only me and him hunt it. But it's not prime acreage either. I mean, the whole surrounding area around it is really heavy pressured. So it's harder hunting, but it is private, and you know nobody's been in there. And how I hunt that different is that we have observation stands there, and we watch open areas that are adjacent to bedding from a distance, and when we see something, we'll move in for the kill. And me and him usually do it as a team. If we see something, we both go in there the next day to kill it. But we try to hunt that once a week, which I think is way too much. but the guy who owns the property that I hunt with is a cancer survivor, and he doesn't have the energy anymore. He used to, when he was younger, go out to the public with me and stuff. So that's all he has. So we hunted a little over-hunted it by hunting it once a week. But those hunts are including sitting back on those observation stands watching. Okay. And that might sound, fruitless, but you put a food plot there and maybe get lucky, and sometimes something wanders by. But we're really trying to get eyes on a big one. What's interesting about that is that 70 acres, as you'd imagine, I've been hunting there for about, 25 years with him. And as you'd imagine, it's really open terrain, so all the prime spots have stands in them by now, right? But yet every time we kill something big, which isn't very often, but when we do, it's from an aggressive move. When we see something and move to it. Those big bucks, I mean, if they've lived on that farm, they've gone past you when they're 1, 2, or 3. And they've learned where those stands are. They smelt where you walk and stuff. And now they're mature, and they walk through there and avoid the stands. I mean, you go in there in wintertime and look at the tracks and watch how they just go through the woods and never go by a guy's tree stand. But what I do is I mix it up a lot. And I'm always looking at the public. I'm always looking at adventure trips and stuff, trying something new. And to me, I really love challenges, going to new places. And it really isn't about killing buck anymore. It's more about testing yourself and testing what you can do and what you can accomplish. And I think what a big thing a lot of people are missing is they're so worried about their success and being somebody in the hunting industry, because now it's all about who you are in the hunting industry. It's no longer about your personal goals, it seems, which is sad. But if you get out of that and you could invest in yourself, hunting on the public land along with your farm makes you grow. You don't grow by hunting the same stuff you know. You don't grow by going to the same tree stand in the back. I mean, I've listened to people tell me how great they are, as you have too. I know. And you listen to them talk, and they're telling you how they got this farm that they hunt on that's 100 acres that their dad owns. And they're so great because they killed all these bucks. Well, it's the same spot. What are you going to do when now you get off that flat land and you hunt hill land? What are you going to do when you go find a swamp? Testing yourself and putting yourself in new scenarios. When you learn how deer go through a swamp, you learn a few things about your farm too. Mm-hmm. You learn how they go through hills. You learn a few things about your farm too. And every time you try something new, you learn something new. Either that or you're blind. There are people that go out there and they'll come back and they'll tell you they saw a big buck, and you'll be like, oh, really? Where was it? Well, it was over there. Well, where, on that transition? Or, well, I don't know. It's about 100 yards over there. What was the wind doing? Oh, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Where I'm sitting there going, what's the wind doing? Why is that deer there? Where's he coming from? Where's he going? Some people just see deer, Mm-hmm. I think asking those questions all the time and really stretching yourself out and trying new things, trying new properties. If you kill your buck on your farm, why quit hunting? I mean, go to another state, try some new places, try some new spots,
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That just simply putting yourself in new situations and then trying to figure it out and asking why, that is, you could accomplish a whole lot if you just kept doing that. You don't need to listen to this podcast. You can learn a whole lot just by doing that. That's good stuff. Something you mentioned there made me think of another aspect of what you do that's pretty interesting to me, and I think that's some of your decision-making process. I'm always interested in trying to kind of look into that a little bit further, and I guess I'll give you this example scenario, and then maybe you can try to help talk through what your decision-making process is to help me understand it. Let's say it's opening night in Michigan, October 1st. And you have to decide between your different possible places to hunt on opening day in Michigan. I'm going to lay it out for you and just say that there's a public land piece where you found a great bedding area on some high ground in a swamp. There's another piece of public land in the same general area where you found some lone white oaks on the edge of a swamp that are dropping. That seems pretty good. And, maybe that's all you know about, and the rest is up in the air. But maybe that part isn't as important as just the larger question, which it's October 1st, the first day of the season. How would you determine what is the best option to hunt in without prior information? We're going to say you don't have trail cameras. This is not your home turf. This is a new area, but you have a little bit of information. How would you go through thinking through, okay, all the different variables? There's wind, there's access, there's hunting pressure, there's the information about these two locations and anything else you might know about. I'm just kind of curious what's going on in your mind as you're sitting in the truck the night before or that morning and deciding, okay, I'm going to go to place A or place B or something else. Can you talk me through that?
I think if I didn't know of any of the bucks in the area, and I was going out there and hunting kind of in the scenario you're talking, I would probably look at a property and I'd try to figure out based on the wind where I think there would be bedding. And if acorns are dropping, I would probably, and it's early season, opening day, I'd probably be looking for something around oaks. I'd probably be looking for isolated oaks near thick cover. Especially most of Michigan, I think I'd be looking for bedding isolated by water in Michigan, and thick stuff. So that water isolated bedding is not going to have oak trees because oaks don't grow that low. They're going to come up to the oak trees and eat, and they've been doing it, prior to season, before people were out there. I'm going to walk those transition lines between the oak trees and swamps, and I'm going to look for sign coming out. I'm going to try and look for a wind that kind of blows in the buck's favor, but quartering into it so that when I hit the trail, the wind ain't quite hitting that buck yet. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the wind's blowing from the swamp. Most of the time, they'll bed right on the edge of the swamp and look at the oak trees. When it's blowing in, they bed in further and smell the approaching danger. That's been my experience with them. So, because they like to look downwind. And I'll follow that transition till I find a sign coming out. That sign might be really heavy browse on the acorns where everything's torn up. And it might be some rubs. And it might be a combination of rubs and tore up acorns and leaves. Hopefully you get a combination of those. Sometimes the rubs are hard to see at that time frame of the year, but you'll see little marks in the trees. Or maybe there'll be a scrape or two, even though it's early, because they're marking because multiple bucks are coming in there, so they're kind of claiming the area. So I'll look for some sort of sign like that. And if I'm on a travel trip, and or I'm there for the weekend, I might scout a large area and walk right through sign that I might walk through sign and say, this might be a good spot, and walk right through it and keep going. and start out my scouting early, like 10 in the morning. And then by 2 in the afternoon, pick which spot was the best and go back and hunt it. And then repeat the next day. That way you're getting on to the best sign that you found,
Yeah.
Fastest.
Now, in one of those scenarios, I think I know what you would do, but you find this, you go in there doing this scouting, you come up on some dynamite sign and what you think is like the bedroom. You're right there at the bedroom or right in the edge of it, and you see the sign. It looks dynamite, but you pass boot tracks, relatively fresh. Not saying they came in that morning, but relatively fresh boot tracks. So there has been somebody back here. But at the same time, you're thinking, man, but I'm in the bedroom. Do you cross that off the list completely because of that pressure, or do you think that you could still maybe get away with a hunt, given the fact that you're right there? What would your thoughts be there?
I would probably keep going. I don't think I would stop if somebody's already hunted there. If I thought those tracks were from a day or two before, I think if anything, horse shooting came out and ran across those tracks, it's altered its path.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I figured. I want to back out a little bit and switch the scenario, switch up our habitat a little bit. Because I know in past podcasts we've talked a lot about marsh country type stuff. I know we talked a lot about your hill country type stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of generic farmland. It's something that I know is pretty easy for you when it comes to marsh or swamp or hill country to pick out where a buck probably is bedded, right? There's certain terrain features in hill country where you think, that's probably going to be the best spot. There should be bucks bedding there. And then when it comes to swamps or marshes, there's certain terrain features, those islands, those points where you can say, there's a pretty good chance there could be bucks there. It seems like it's a little bit harder to do that with farmland. I'm curious. So let's say we're in Michigan again. We'll keep rolling with that. You're dropped off now, and we've got a random flat set of farm ground. And I told you you're going to hunt it today, but you've never seen it before. We don't have a marsh. We don't have big hills. We don't have a swamp. It's just kind of scattered timber and crops, some brushy stuff. And what I'm curious first about is, could you pick out the bedding areas, buck bedding areas from a map? Like, do you think you could do that with some kind of degree of confidence without those big obvious terrain features? And if so, could you walk me through what you would be looking for on that flat farmland and how you go about picking those spots?
What I'd look for on flat farmland is I do not expect bucks to be bedding in the middle of woodlots, which is what everybody else seems to expect. I think bucks are more edge creatures, and you're going to find your mature bucks on tree lines where they can see across fields. You're going to see them in little patches off to the side. Really, really often on farms, everybody that hunts them has the same access in, parks in the same spot, walks down the same path back into the farm the same way. And I find that the mature bucks often have a bedding spot that overlooks watching that access. And then you have to mix it up in how you come in. When they do bed in square, like woodlot terrains, there's two ways they bed. One of them is that they bed on the outside edge, whichever edge is downwind. They smell the woods behind them and they watch the fields in front of them. The other one is to get into the inside of that woods to an opening or a low spot where it's a little wet or marshy. We get on the edges of that. But typically, it's the tree lines or the stuff off to the side where I find the biggest stuff. So that can be hard to hunt and it can be hard to predict. But another thing that is really, really important with flat farmland is nothing is really perfectly flat. And I find that the little bit of elevation change makes a huge difference. And on what you'd call flat farms, I find the best bedding is usually at the lowest point and the highest point on the farm.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver, off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam Motor Treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that Seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. And it's really simple. When you pour it into your gas tank, Seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it do its job. Now, you probably know someone who's used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again, because people everywhere rely on it to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way they should the entire season. So, help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more. Interesting. If then you had a spot like this and we're predicting that there's going to be some bedding near those edges probably, and these bucks are going to try to watch those openings. What if it's one of those farms that is impossible to access without coming across that open field? Like it's a big farm field near the road, and then the back half of the farm is the timber, and you don't have access to the backside. So the only way you can access it is across the field. Do you just get as far away from the section? I don't know. Like how would you try to deal with that scenario where you know that, hey, there's bucks?
I've had that scenario where I know that there's bucks watching, get the wind to their back, watching the farmhouse, and there's no other way in there because it's all open field on that side. And what I've done is try walking past them, like make believe you don't know they're there, and then circling around someplace else to hunt them, like doing a big J-hook around the farm to come through cover to get back to them. Another thing is, a lot of times when they bed watching the farm, they are watching the access route. They bed if they're watching that route, they get the wind to their back. They get the wind to the back, they're smelling behind them, and they're watching with their eyes the trail. So when the wind changes, they can't bed like that. They're not going to bed facing the wind, watching for you and smelling for you, because then something could come up from behind them and get them. It's all about safety. So they bed with the wind to their back. So when you're accessing, they're watching you. So if those beds are close to one edge or something, you can just wait till the wind's different, to access. Like when I said that they bed on the downwind side of a woodlot. Yeah. You see it time and time again. Guys will get camera pictures over and over and over of these bucks in the field, and they're like, every time I hunt there, they don't come out. Well, yeah, they're sitting on the edge watching you, and you wait for the wind to be in your face, which is when they're bedding on the edge watching the field. Go hunt there when they're bedding on the other side of the woodlot, and they're going to come over there. Yeah,
that's the catch-22 when you want to be safe about the wind.
Right.
Now, speaking of wind, historically, from everything I remember us ever talking about and other things, you've typically put all your cards, or most of them at least, in playing the wind, not worrying too much about scent control, and just saying, hey, yeah, you can't beat a buck's nose, so you might as well just focus on the thing you can, to some degree, control, which is being in the right place in relation to wind. I guess question number one, this isn't a scenario, this is a regular question. Question number one, is that still true to this date, or has that evolved at all over the last 5 years or so? And then question number 2 then would be, you head in for a hunt, and let's say it's in one of these scenarios like we're talking about where it's farmland, flat, and you went in with a certain wind direction that you felt confident with. But then in the last hour and a half of daylight or so, let's say it's an evening hunt, last hour and a half of daylight, that wind dies down. And all of a sudden, your scent's doing wonky things. You put your milkweed out there, and sometimes it's going to the north, and sometimes it drops down, goes to the south, and you're getting some weird stuff going on there. What would you do in that scenario? So question number 1 is your thinking changed at all on scent control? Question number 2 is that scenario.
So question number 1, no. I still believe there's no way you're fooling a deer's nose. I don't think you can do it. I think if they smell your ground scent, they know how long ago you were there. They smell your air scent, they know exactly where you're at. I do believe some deer ignore you, and I've had that. I've had deer where my wind's blowing right at them, and I know I stink, and they just don't care. And I've had them where they get the first whiff of you and they blow out of there. But my attitude on that has never changed.
Okay.
What was number 2?
Number 2 was that last hour and a half of daylight, the wind dies down, and all of a sudden your wind kind of starts swirling now. It's not doing what you thought. So your whole game plan was based off of this certain wind direction, but now the wind dies and it's swirling. Do you stick it out for the last hour and a half, or do you bail completely?
Okay, here's how that works with me. I mean, there was a time when I would bail out of there, and my thinking has changed. Probably like 10 years ago or so, it started to change, and it's gotten to the point now where I feel like once I'm in there and I've gotten my scent in there, I was there for a reason. I might as well just stay. And I've had plenty of times when the wind's blowing right at a deer and you kill them anyways. I would never set up in that scenario, but once you're there, what the heck? Your scent's already in there. You've already burned the area. You might as well sit there. And there's been plenty of times where that has paid off for me, where your air just goes over them or something, you know. In a lot of cases for people, though, there's a reason for that stuff, and that doesn't happen to me as much as other people, because I look at the terrain before I set up, and I try to set up not into terrains that are going to cause swirling or you're going to get thermal pulls. There's a lot of guys that think a deer has a sixth sense because right before dark, the wind's been in your face all day. That deer comes from, upwind, and all of a sudden it freezes, locks, and turns around and runs off. And you're like, oh my God, that deer knew I was here somehow. And really, it smelled you. And if you use the milkweed, you'll see that your thermals change, in the calm spots. But if you got any kind of downward slope, if you're hunting uphill of the deer, as soon as the sun goes down or before the sun goes up, every time it's calm, your scent is going to pull down that hill. It's going to be just like pouring water in that hill. And you might not even feel it. If it's just rolling hills or, just slight elevation changes, you probably won't even feel it, but you'd see it if you used milkweed.
Now, another scenario I've heard you talk about there being a thermal impact is when you're by water, but I don't think that's something we've covered on the podcast. Could you elaborate a little bit how a water scenario could cause a thermal pull? Because I'm envisioning you're in a swamp, there's a lot of standing water, maybe you're right on the edge of a little piece of high ground and it's water everywhere else. What would happen in that scenario or something like it?
So it's got to be like stagnant, shallow water. That's, a lot of times it's on black mud or whatever. When that water gets warm, like swamp water or like a real shallow pond, when it gets warm, it gets like bathtub water. The sun goes down, the water stays warm, but the air cools. So right above that pond or that water source or that swamp, that air will just go straight up. And when it does that, it displaces the air above the water. So it pulls air in from the sides. And that cooler air heats as it goes over the water and then rises and just pulls more in. So it changes the air current with that thermal pull. And usually, that's another one where you have a hard time feeling it. But if you check it, you'll see it. You see your milkweed float over the water and then shoot straight up. So what I try to do is if I go hunt a point or something, is I try to set myself up right up against the water so that my scent pulls that way and up, rather than being up from like if you're in the center and the deer goes between you and the water, your scent pulls to the deer. So I try to get right up against the water where I can predict where the where the thermal rise will be.
Yeah. It's interesting. This fits in perfectly with a question that a listener sent in a scenario. But this, rather than a stagnant water, this is moving water. And so we're talking a river. And so let's apply what you just described to a little bit more specific situation here. It's late October, let's say October 25th, and you've located a piece of public land that's got this floodplain river bottom, and it's being used for kind of everything. It's being used for bedding and travel and some food sources in there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's an oak tree or something that's dropping. But then there's these ridges that lead up out of the river bottom up to private land, crop fields up high. Could you describe how you would think about accessing and setting up in that kind of general scenario in late October, given what you just mentioned, the possible impacts of thermals in that scenario, any other things you'd be thinking about in that hypothetical?
I would think that you'd probably still get some thermal rise on the hill, even though you got the river at the base, because the side of the hill is going to heat up. But rivers, I haven't seen a lot of thermal impact with them. With the moving water, I think it stays colder. Colder water should expand and push outward. But I haven't really seen much of an impact with it, except for that if it's at a base of a hill, if the hill's small, you don't seem to get that thermal rise on the hill as much. But I still think it's there. Just it's slighter, you know.
Okay.
Coming in there, again, it would be more based on how that deer is bedding in there, where I think he's at, and looking at what that wind's doing and where it's rising, where it's falling, and which direction it's actually blowing, and trying to figure out which direction the deer is going and getting in front of them. I mean, it sounds basic, but that's basically how I'd look at it.
Yeah. Have you had much experience with river bottom bedding or creek bottom bedding? Have you kind of seen how they're using that terrain in any kind of consistent way?
Yeah, I mean, big river bottoms that are all flat, like floodplains, are really hard. You're looking for like little island clumps of trees where it's just a little higher elevation out in that grassy crap. You know, you're looking for oxbows in the river. I mean, oxbows I've done really well on. What they'll do in an oxbow is they'll get in there and they'll monitor that little opening, that little land bridge going in there. And then that comes in there, they go through the river to the other side to escape. But other than the oxbows, you really got to look for those edges, which in a lot of cases are going to be where there's little clumps of trees or something, you know, out there. They're not going to just bed out in the middle of open grass. I mean, you probably find beds out there, but it's not the consistent type of stuff that you can hunt. And one of the problems is I've been in some river bottoms in western Wisconsin where you get in there and you really learn a buck, and then you come back to the next year and you got to learn it over again because the flooding puts timber all over the, you know, displaces it all over the place, and the bedding changes because of it. So it is a hard nut to hunt, but it's doable. And again, you have to look at the terrain and look at how the land lays out, because they're edge creatures, and that's what you got to think is they're on those transition lines. They're not just, you know, bedded out in the middle of grass. They're bedded there because there's an elevation or because of a clump of trees, because they have some sort of advantage with wind and sight. You know?
How do you think that they use the wind when it comes to bedding in those oxbow situations? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're kind of talking about those outside big bends of those S curves in rivers, and then they'll be where they come together. Are they setting up, you're saying, facing how it creates almost a peninsula? Are they facing out from that peninsula, or are they facing the water and smelling the bit of land behind them?
So I've seen them bed two ways. One with the wind blowing down the land channel into it, and one with it blowing out, where they watch the land opening, or they smell it. But most of the time, what I've seen is where they're smelling it. They're looking out across the river, and the wind's blowing in, and they're smelling it. Okay. That's been my best scenarios.
That's helpful. I've got a couple public land river bottom spots I'm going to be hunting this year, and I've been thinking through that and scouting that situation and been curious to see what will play out in real time. So That's interesting.
They were really a key when I hunted in southwestern Iowa, where it was all like real open farmland. Lots of big bucks, but there's hardly any terrain for them. Well, they have to bed along those rivers, and those oxbows were just loaded with good bucks.
And then how do you typically see them travel out of there? I don't know if this is, I'm just spitballing here, but I'm wondering, would they usually be bedded on the opposite side? I guess it's probably wind dependent, but opposite side of the food. Like if there's a main, I'm imagining kind of that scenario I just laid out there where there's these crop fields up high and then there's this river bottom down low. And I'm wondering, would they usually bed across the river from their feeding destination? And then they come in the afternoon, they leave their bed, cross the river, head up. Or would they be more, I guess it probably depends on how large the river is too. But have you seen any tendencies there?
Yeah. I've seen them go through the river to get the crops, and I've seen them go the other way too, and just walk the land bridge out. The biggest buck I ever shot, I didn't recover, but that was on an oxbow in Iowa. It was a giant 12-pointer. And that buck, I seen him in the oxbow. I jumped him out of it the day before. And the next day I went there in the morning and set up before light and waited for him to come back. And he came back at gray light. And he was going to walk right in the oxbow, right up the land bridge to get in there, and didn't make it. But yeah, I've seen a lot of them where they just walk the land bridge out.
Okay.
But they cross the river too, and in a lot of cases, if the river's deep and fast, they only want to go through that if they have to escape. But that's another thing, is they won't go across a huge river. There's got to be a valid escape. Mm-hmm. There's got to be like a quick couple bounds and they're out of there. And another thing is, if the river, with nowadays how many people boat and canoe and kayak and stuff, if the river's getting used by boaters and stuff a lot, they won't bed those oxbows. So a river that's jammed up with crap that's smaller usually works better. Yeah. Like kind of a ditch river or something.
Yep. Let's jump to a totally different situation now. Let's say we're going to, I know what I want to talk about. I want to look at how you would go about zeroing in on a specific buck. Let's put you on October 20th, and you get word from another hunter, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's another person that hunts the public, that this buck that you spotted in the summer or that you saw last year, this buck's back finally. You haven't been able to see him all season, but someone else saw him and said, hey, that buck's out there. I saw him. But you personally haven't had any sightings of him yet this year. You personally have no trail camera pictures of him this year. And it's, it's well into the season. It's over a month into the Wisconsin season for you. And he hasn't been in the spots you thought he would be, right? Because you assumed he'd be back, so you scouted for beds and you found where you thought he'd be. You've hunted them now maybe once, maybe twice, I don't know. He wasn't there. But now he's alive. What would you do with this new piece of intel starting on October 20th to go about try to locate him? Would it be, all right, I'm just going to go hunt those bedding areas now because he's back? Or would you go to shining or all of a sudden bust out a bunch of trail cameras? What would you do to zero in now?
I'd probably go over and I'd try to either see the buck or see some sign of him, because there's a little bit of a mistrust with other people. You don't know if somebody's trying to throw you off so you don't hunt their area by telling you something you want, that you want to hear. Yeah. You don't know if somebody's little 8-pointer to you is a giant to them. If it's somebody that you trust and the intel is trustable, I'm going to probably end up going straight over there and hunting. But if it's like 90% of the time and there's a little bit of doubt, I want to see some sign. I want to see that the rub line has appeared, that there's some huge tracks over there, that there's something going on to tell me that deer is indeed where this person saw it. And then once I know a deer is over there, I'm just going to hunt that deer down. I'm going to go from bedding area to bedding area to bedding area and just hunt that whole area down until I run across them. And to me, that hasn't been too hard of a scenario. If you know a deer is in a certain section, and he's not partially on private or something like that, if it's a big section of public and he's there, it's really not too hard to just start, figuring out where he should be and just going from section to section to section. And if you can't find him, figure out, well, where didn't I go? Where didn't I check? And go throw a stand at that, and just keep moving. And that gets me on deer pretty fast.
Can you, I know this is kind of tricky to try to pull together an imaginary situation here, but maybe there's even a specific example. But could you just describe in detail what that first hunt in would be like? We've talked about it in generalities many times in the past, but I mean, specifically, tell me about what you found on the map and what you found previously. And when you sneak in there, you're going to walk, tippy toes in the last 100 yards, and then you set up with an X number of yards where that bed is. And just walk me through the whole nitty gritty of that first hunt in, just for people that haven't heard in the past how you would do this. I'd like to just get really detailed on one example of it, to kind of color this just a little bit more for people, and maybe get into more detail than we have in the past for folks that have heard that.
Okay, so what's the terrain?
We're going to say that this is one of those marshy situations. I've got here we go. Here's an exact scenario. You do know of a spot this buck has been bedded. It is marshy stuff, but there is a piece of high ground in this marsh about 30 by 30 yards wide. There's a couple cottonwoods on it. Let's say a couple little brushy, red osier dogwood type shrubs or something, maybe a telephone pole tree on there too. And then the rest of it's surrounded by cattails and water. And I'm going to give you one more detail. There is a one access road, and it's actually relatively close where you can get to, but it's to the, what direction would this be? This spot would be to the west of the access road. Is that too much information? That's a very specific scenario.
It sure is.
I'm weaving in some example data from a other question into this one, so we'll get double duty here.
Okay, so I'm going to make sure the wind's right. First of all, I'm not going in there on something I don't like. So if I got the wind right, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take that access road as far as I can, and then I'm going to bust off of it. I'm going to try not to walk up the deer trail, so I'm going to try and cut in here on an angle and slide in real slow for the last 200 yards or so. I'm going to go like pins and needles. I'm going to go out. If I think it's a kill day and I'm going into a spot that I want to keep kind of covert, I'm going midday. I don't want to walk past a hunter. So I want to, if a hunter goes out there, I want him to have no idea where I'm at. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get as close as I can, probably to a tree I've already picked out. If I know the bedding area as well as you described it, I probably do. So I have a tree in mind already, or at least a specific area, because I don't always end up in the same tree based on the wind or the exact wind or whatever, or sign. I'm going to go in there, slide in there, and I'm going to really slowly put my stand down, take it apart, start putting the sticks on real slow, quiet. And I'm going to come up that tree facing the bedding area, because I'm probably going to be, if it's a marshy situation, approximately 70 or 80 yards from that bed. And I want the tree between me and the bedding. And I'm going to go up that tree facing the bed, looking at the bed, and one stick at a time, and keep an eye over there for movement, for if I'm getting too high or whatever. And then when I get to the height where I want to be, and I'm not going to saw anything, because I don't want to cause a commotion or noise. So I'm going to get to a point where I'm high enough where I'm not going to get spotted, but I'm not so high and got a shot. And I'm going to try and put the stand right in a position where I have natural shooting lanes. And when I put the last stick up, I'm going to have the stand on my back. I'm going to put the stick up, climb onto it real slow, no fast, quick movements. And when I get up there, I'm going to take the stand off my back and I'm going to slide it around to the front of the tree, facing the deer, facing directly at them. And I'm going to put the stand on that way. And then I'm going to slide up that last stick as high as I can get and just slide around into that stand. And from there, I'm waiting for that buck to come in.
You you are one of the people who has definitely most popularized this kind of hunting, where you'll slip in there close to a bedding area, hang sticks in a stand right there and hunt it. A lot more people are hunting that way now than they were a decade ago. What's the biggest mistake you are hearing about, or that you know that must be happening from these newer guys and girls trying to do it the way you do it? I gotta believe you're hearing from a lot of these people, and there must be some of those like head shaking moments for you, where you keep on saying, they're not doing it right. Is there anything that sticks out when you think about that?
I think the biggest thing is that when people hear the details on how deer bed, there's a shadow of doubt. If you haven't seen it and gone out and walked out and looked at these beds in the scenarios that I've described them, you're probably saying, this guy's nuts. I mean, I haven't seen that or whatever. Then they go out there and they walk out there and they run into it and they find some good bedding area, and it's just loaded with rubs, and it's exactly where they thought it would be based on what I told them where they look. And they throw all their eggs at that basket, and they think this is the greatest spot in the world. And I see this over and over and over again, where guys just think because they found one spot that looks great. I mean, there's still worn out beds and, big rubs coming in and out, and they're like, I'm going to kill this deer. And what they're not taking into consideration is two things. Number one, there's a specific timing to when this bed is getting used. It might be the end of October, it might be around rut, it might be when a certain crop is in. Then if you get that down, then you got to remember that I'm hunting a scenario like that just about every day. And I hunt a whole season, get 5 cracks. You know what I mean? I hunt 80 times a year.
Yeah, you're hunting a different spot like that.
Right. Every day I hunt a different spot like that. And they're thinking that one spot is their kill spot, And the other thing is when they find 1 or 2 spots like that, they can't bring themselves to go walk on a transition and set up on a rub coming out of a swamp or something. They want to go back to that spot, and then they burn it out, and then the spot ain't no good anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned that an important part there is understanding when that bed's getting used. What are the things that you're looking for to make that determination? How do you figure that out?
You really got to be a detective when you look at bedding areas. Like when I look at them in the spring, I'm taking a lot of things into consideration. I'm looking at how old the beds are. Like if you're looking at them after the snow, how old the feces are that are on the ground. You're looking at the amount of cover. Sometimes the beds are hard to see, and they look like they're older, maybe from early season. Maybe it's right up against an oak flat. Maybe the beds look like they're really fresh when you find them. Maybe they're right at the end of the season. Some bedding areas get used all year. Some bedding areas are right up against doe bedding, and you start to figure they're during the rut. And another thing is if the bedding areas are just torn up with rubs, you can figure it's towards the end of October, early November. But from what I've seen from hunting these bedding areas, I'm seeing this more and more and more as I get older and do more of this, is that there's some really specific timing. You go back and you look at there's bedding areas that I've hunted for years and years and years, and you look at the bucks I've shot there, and I've hunted them, like throw 3 sits at them. You hunt them early season, you hunt them in November, and you hunt them late season. And it seems to be like when you look back over the past, the timing of when you killed the deer was, pretty much the same dates. There's a certain time period when they're in there. And, even my primary bedding areas where I've killed deer at all different times of the season, there's specific times when they're the best for giants. And I've got some bedding areas that look great. Some of these bedding areas have like that I would call like nurseries that hold like a lot of 2-year-old bucks. And those 2-year-olds will rip up a bedding area. They'll put rubs all over the place. And they'll have rub lines going in and out, and they'll fool people because of all the sign. Guys will want to hunt there. Where, I look at a big area like a big marsh I hunt, and if I've hunted there for a few years, I start to realize that when I kill a monster there, it's in one of 5 or 6 bedding areas. Even though I know of 150 bedding areas out there, those really big old bucks get to choose the best spots. And some of that takes a little time. I mean, this isn't something you're going to learn overnight. It's something that you have to work at and be willing to invest time into. I mean, everybody seems to want that quick fix and that instant success, you know.
Doesn't usually come that easy.
Right.
So this bedding area situation, let's dig in here a little bit further with a couple different outcomes maybe. Let's say that we've snuck into one of these bedding areas you described. You've hung the stand the way you've described. Just as you swing your tree stand to the other side of the tree to get set up, you hear a deer blow, you look up, and there's a big rack running away and a whitetail flagging. What do you do in that scenario? Do you bail? You spook the buck, the hunt's done, on to a new place? Or would you think maybe I could reposition and he'll come back in? What would you do?
If I think he saw me in that tree, I probably will just move. Sometimes they'll come back in, but usually not if they see you. No, it's a whole different bedding area. Yeah. If it's the target buck, I might try to figure out where he went and move there, you know, and circle around someplace to get to where I think he's going. But if I don't know, maybe I'll just go to a different bedding area or something. But I think if he saw me, it's over. If I kick a deer up and I'm walking in there to set up, I don't think he's seen me. The wind's in my favor, but it just didn't like something of the sounds I made or something, any soft bumps rather than hard, and kind of trots out of there. Well, then I'm going to probably think about he might come back, and I might look at how's he going to come back. And I've set up on that in the past, and I've had limited success. And most of the time, if I'm busted, it's because the deer circles in downwind and I'm not far enough downwind. So I can think of a few different instances right off the top of my head where I had jumped a buck out of a bed and had that set up anyways and had that buck come back that same day and circle way around downwind and bust me. And now I kind of look at it as like, if I jump that buck and I think he's going to come back, I'm going to look downwind and think, okay, what is he going to do when he comes back? Because usually they're going to follow a transition or something in. So I want to get on that downwind transition and get him circling around to come back in. Okay. But if he saw me or smelled me, not moving.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam Motor Treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that Seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. And it's really simple. When you pour it into your gas tank, Seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it do its job. Now, you probably know someone who's used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again, because people everywhere rely on it to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way they should the entire season. So help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more. Here's another move or don't move scenario. If we're just continuing on here, let's say you get up in that tree fine, you haven't spooked anything, but you see another hunter. Maybe another hunter walks by, I don't know, a couple 100 yards away or something. 100, 150 yards. Close enough that you're like, oh shit, but not so close that he necessarily blew everything out that might be around you. Are you going to wait it out? Do you just get out of there? What's your stance, or what's that distance or situation have to be where you would stay or go and make that decision?
If he didn't penetrate the bedding, if he didn't get his wind into the bedding or whatever, or if he just kept walking past and never went in there, I just stay. I just sit there and hunt it. And I've had people walk by and had deer get up and come past me afterwards. I mean, that's happened quite a few times. And I've even kicked satellite deer that aren't your target deer and have them run right through the bedding area. And you think your hunt's over, and a little while later, the buck gets up right where those deer ran and comes in. But I've also had that buck get up and run out of there.
Yeah.
I can remember a hunt, gun hunting, where I went and set up on a bedding area. And when I got in there, there was people a little too close for my comfort, but I was already in there. It was late, so I sat there. And right at closing time, a 2.5-year-old buck got up like 30 yards from me out of the thick dogwood, and one step at a time moved real slow. If I wanted to shoot him, I could have, but it was actually probably right at closing time. Was snuck out of there. And, you'd have never dreamed that buck was sitting there with people around,
Yeah.
But they'll do that.
What's too close? Like you mentioned, there's people too close for comfort for you. What's that range where, I mean, on public land, sometimes there's other guys out there, and I've hunted, and there's somebody within sight. Maybe it's way far away, but you could see a little patch of orange or something. How do you think about that? Are you out of there if you can see someone at all, or if you know they're within a couple 100 yards, or what's that range of comfort for you?
More it's a matter of what they're getting into, not really where they're at. You can have a person pretty close to you, and it doesn't bother me at all. I don't like them knowing where I'm at, but that's a different story. But to me, I mean, if they're infringing on your bedding area, if they're infringing on your bucks, that's where they're kind of blowing your hunt. But like you say, when a person walks by, there's two kinds of walks by. They walk the trail that every hunter that walks through there walks, where a deer expects them, or they wander off into the water real close to the bedding and through there. I mean, you can walk right past the deer if you're on a trail where the deer expects you. But if you start getting off of it, they get real nervous. If you go where you don't belong. So if a hunter is just out there kind of wandering around, like trying to kick up ducks or something, duck hunting, and walks into the water a little bit and stuff around the bedding area, there's no way I'm staying around. Or if the guy's hunting infringing that, or say he's 100 yards away and his wind is blowing right into my bedding area, and he's going to stay there till dark, that would probably talk me into getting down and moving.
Yeah. Yeah, those are frustrating moments. That's for sure.
Yeah, it happens to everybody eventually.
Yes. Yes, it does. Let's look at a set of circumstances that I think a lot of people deal with. And what I'm most interested in is how you would approach this situation at different points in the year. The situation in general, let's say, is you've gone in and you're hunting a location that you've previously picked out to some degree. It's a bedding area that you snuck in and set a stand on, or it's a spot that you came to specifically to hunt this spot. And then you spot a mature buck move out of range where you didn't expect him. Maybe let's say he's 80 yards away or 100 yards away. So you've seen him do something outside of what you expected. What would you do the next day if this sighting was in early season? So let's say October 1st versus if it was in the middle of the rut, we'll say November 8th, versus if it was late season, we'll say end of December. Would you do the exact same thing every one of those days? Would you think about stay or go decision differently depending? What's your take on that?
if the deer was doing the same thing in each one of those scenarios, like not chasing a doe or something, I think I would do the exact same thing in each scenario. I would get down the next day. I'd move over and hunt where that buck was. I think your odds are probably a little higher in the late season scenario. They're really patternable at that time, and then they're second most patternable in the early season. And then in the rut, they're still patternable, but it sure won't last long.
Yeah. That's my biggest curiosity was the rut situation, because it's possible that what they're doing is totally random at that time of year, but at the same time, sometimes it's not.
Right.
For you, is it all just based off of their behavior? Are they with a doe? Do they look like they're cruising? Or are they wandering? Or what?
Even if it's with a doe, I got to wonder if the doe's going to do the same thing. Right. I really like hunting patterns. And a lot of the times you're wrong. Maybe 3 out of 4 times that deer doesn't show up again the next day in the same spot. But, I like the odds of 1 out of 4. Yeah. Those aren't bad.
Now, is that only if you've got the exact same or similar wind? Or would you do it even if the wind changes?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, he might not even be bedding her around that scenario if the wind changes, but I certainly ain't going to change if the wind changes for the bad. But I might give it a shot if it's not the same. A lot of times, and especially in certain terrains, they'll have other bedding areas real close to where they were bedded and still come out using the same trails, still stage the same areas, and do the same things. So there's a very good chance that he'll still walk down that trail the next day if the wind's wrong. However, that's another one where I think the odds are even lower during rut, because in rut, a lot of times they're bedding and traveling based on the wind a lot more than they are at other times of the year.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at a slightly different version of this, which is something that a lot of people deal with too, where it's trail camera based intel. So rather than you seeing a deer somewhere and you want to move there, let's now say instead you've got a daylight trail camera picture of a buck doing something. And he's doing it yesterday. And either you've got a cell phone picture or you checked it this morning or something. Hey, he moved in daylight here yesterday, but today I've got different conditions. Let's say he did 2 days in a row, or 2 out of 3 days he moved in daylight in this spot with a westerly wind of some kind. Today you find out about it, but you've got easterly winds or some variation. Do you think, wind's different, I'm not going in, or do you have to try because, hey, he was in the area and he was daylight, I got to try? What are your thoughts there?
Usually I'm waiting for that wind to repeat. However, I guess that could change it. Like say it's a morning picture and he's under in daylight in the morning. I'm going to say, okay, well, he's bedded real close. Right. So then I might try and slip in there.
Okay.
But I think if I have a pattern to wind, I'm gonna wait for that wind to be the same. I'm not going to go in there and disrupt a good thing if the wind's wrong. Yeah. I'm going to try and wait for that same pattern. I really don't want to wait too long because you see, and you know this as well as I do, those patterns in those bedding areas, they might be there 4 or 5 days, and then they're gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I've had a scenario like that last year. I mean, I had a cell cam out, and it was on a little tiny island on a place about, 45 minutes from my house. And I put the cell camera there, and then I would travel over there and hunt when, the bucks are there. And there's this real big 12-point I wanted to get. But there's other bucks I didn't even know about. And it turned out like 16 different Pope and Young bucks were living in this swamp or going past that camera. And that camera get real active at times. And it was so hard to pattern those deer because you'd pattern them and then you'd go in there and they're bedded so close you'd kick them out. But it was the only place you could hunt. Everything was up to your waist in water, until you're on that island. And the island's a 1/4 acre. One time I had that 12-pointer on there in daylight in the morning in front of that camera, walked past with a doe right around Halloween. So I thought, well, he's got to be bedding right there. And I'm speaking, the wind is perfect. It was a rare east wind, and it gave me a chance to get right in there. And I'm thinking I could just slip out of the water right up a tree. I slid up the tree. That thing was bedded 10 yards from the camera. But you can't see them because the camera's not aiming at them. Wow. Sometimes those cameras frustrate you more than they help you.
Yeah, that's for sure. Man. So did you ever figure out a way to try to hunt in there without blowing them out, or was that a puzzle you haven't solved?
I try every year. I've been hunting that deer for 4 years. This last year, I really spent some time in there in winter, swimming around, and really got to know the area. Found a couple new ways to get at them. Go in from a canal with a kayak. I found a spot where there's some just a couple trees off to the side where there's a killer bed in there I didn't even know about. It was a tangle. I got in there in middle of the summer and opened it up and had to cut a trail to get to it in July because it's so thick with cattails you could not get to it quietly. So I have some other ways to get in there. I'll try. I don't know how much longer this deer is going to be alive. He's pretty old, but I believe he's still alive. I got a glimpse of a giant there shining 2 weeks ago coming out of that stuff that I think was him, but I'm not absolutely positive.
Hey, speaking of shining, this is something that I've been thinking about a little bit more, and I know we've talked about a little bit in the past, but are there any things for people that want to add that as something they can do, which in some states, as you mentioned, you cannot do, in some states you can do, but there's certain windows of time when you're allowed to versus not, so make sure you check your regulations. But can you just elaborate a little bit on some specific times you should do that or ways you should do it in such a fashion that it actually helps you? So basically we're talking about shining a spotlight in fields, but can you dive into that a little bit more deeply and how you can make that most useful from a hunting perspective?
Yeah, I try not to waste my time shining in areas where I can't hunt. To me, it's not about sightseeing or, and then if it's private land, sometimes you piss people off. So I try to stick to the public or the land adjacent to public where I hunt and or the farm that I have permission on. And I just try to catch the deer. I think a lot of times, here up until I think it's September 10th or 15th or something like that, you can shine all night, and then there's a limit at 10 o'clock. But when you shine all night, I mean, wait until about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, or even later, is sometimes a good thing because they're pretty shy about getting to the roadsides until later. And often, if you go too early, all you see is green eyes half mile back. Catching them by the roads is better.
Yeah.
I see a lot of my biggest stuff here, or find a lot of my biggest stuff here at 3 or 4 in the morning. Usually on my way to work. So once I find something, I narrow it down. So I'll go look at public properties all over the place that I know about, and I'll start narrowing my focus. First, it'll be a really wide net. And then when I locate some good stuff, I'll start, really start looking around the area where that good stuff is and narrowing my focus, and then trying to figure out what fields they're going into or the particular buck is going into, how wide his pattern is. And I just try to, once I've got that kind of down, I try to keep a rough eye on him, where I'm not harassing him, but I just keep tabs. So if his pattern starts changing before season, that I'm onto it and I know where he's moving to or what's going on with him.
And then you can pin that sighting down to, if he's feeding out in this field at 3 a.m, there's a decent chance that he's bedded in this place 3/4 of a mile away, and this place is the other direction. That's kind of how you start picking where he's most likely spending his time.
See, you might be seeing him in a field at 3 a.m, and a couple nights in a row you see him there at 3 a.m, and then, the next night you go out at, say, 10 p.m, and he's 2 fields over. And the next day you go out, just before daylight at 5 a.m, and you catch him on the other side of field over, and you get a direction of travel. So the different time frames and stuff help too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because that's probably the biggest thing is you need point A and point B is great, but if you don't know direction of travel and when he's traveling that direction, you don't have the connecting part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Now, this is a situation that maybe shining would be the answer to some degree. Maybe not. But what about this totally different set of circumstances? This maybe is more of a mental thing than anything. Your season opens September 15th, right? Let's say we get all the way to November 15th. It's mid-November. You've hunted early season. You've hunted through October. You put in a bunch of long days during the first part of the rut, and you've yet to get eyes on a mature buck. Nothing that you want to shoot yet. You've seen young ones. You've seen lots of does, but you've had other hunters come in and muck your stuff up. Just stuff's been going wrong. It's been a bad year. How do you mentally handle that? I don't know if you've had a year like that at some point in your experience, and you can talk to me about how you handled that situation. And then secondly, from a tactical standpoint, at this point, if you've been hunting weeks and weeks and weeks and nothing, do you think that it's a keep on keeping on kind of situation? Like, hey, if you just keep doing the right things long enough, it'll finally come together? Or is it, no, I need to call a major audible and really change things up?
So, I mean, everybody has hard times in their hunting. I think they affect me a lot less now. I think that you grow with confidence, you know what I mean, as you grow as a hunter. And I know my tactics work. I know what I'm doing works. So a streak of bad luck doesn't really bother me as much as it probably bothers other people. And I can kind of laugh at those mistakes more than other people, I think. But I just keep going. And I really don't worry about yesterday. I worry about tomorrow. I think to me, the only thing that really matters is what's going on tomorrow. You can't change the past. So I've got a different attitude than most people too. Usually if I'm hunting a certain buck and I'm hunting an area down and there's, 10 spots he could be, about 9 spots in, I'm smiling. I feel like my odds are going up. I've eliminated a lot of spots.
Yeah.
And if I go through all 10, then I'm thinking, well, okay, he's hiding some spot that I'm not expecting. I'm going to go search a little harder. But I do feel like I'm getting closer, even if I'm not seeing something. If I know he's there, I'm going to hunt him down and find him. And if I'm not onto something or anything, I'll just go off on a mission and find something. If it means skipping a day of hunting and putting in a hard day of scouting, I'll go find something. And you get to that November time frame, you can tell if a buck's been in an area it's ripped up, and I'll just go and check public lands and maybe even spots I haven't been to and just start going on a mission to get on them,
Yeah. Yeah. So is that a situation that's ever, like you said, it's almost invigorating maybe because you've crossed all these different things off the map and you can finally say you're narrowing down. When you get into a deal like that, are you at a point yet where that's like a fun challenge? Like, shit, I'm going to figure it out no matter what.
Yeah. I do get that way. I get kind of like a cocky attitude where it's like, oh, you think you got me outsmarted? I'm going to get you. I do get that way, and sometimes you fail anyways, but it really doesn't feel like you fail. I mean, to me, there's something, there's like an inner drive with me, like where I love to chase more than to kill. And as long as I'm on something, I'm on a buck and I'm out there trying, I'm happy. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, anticlimactic when you shoot the thing or you get one early season and you're like, well, now what? It's like I can't be out of state for the whole next 3 months.
Yeah.
But it isn't the same as it was when I was younger. I think a young guy goes out there, he's got something to prove. He doesn't have a lot of bucks under his belt, and he wants to show everybody that he's a good hunter and he's adequate at what he does. And that he's capable of doing it, and that he's not just all talk. So he's going out there really trying to kill something. And you see those young guys where they'll miss a shot or something, they'll swear at themselves, they'll throw their bow down, they'll be pissed. Or a guy that's done this for a while can just laugh at it and go, "You won this time,"
Yeah.
And so it's a different ball game when you get to when you become an accomplished hunter. I think there's stages you go through in life, and I guess some people probably don't get all the way into stages, but some people do.
You mentioned the specific example of missing a buck. What do you do now when you miss a buck? How do you handle that mentally? I don't know, is there anything you do in the days afterwards to get your mind right again, or to get your shooting right, or anything? I know you had a season, I don't remember if it was last year, a couple of years ago, where you had a little bit of a bad streak like that. How do you mentally and tactically handle that?
Yeah, I had a pretty bad streak last year. I think I blew 5 opportunities in a row. And that's some really nice bucks. One of them had 16 points at least that I could count from the tree. And you know, it was frustrating more than I'd like to admit. I'd like to tell you that, you know, that I laughed it all off.
Yeah.
But, you know, I laughed probably the first 2 off or 3.
Yeah, everyone's got some limits.
But then you're starting to realize there's something off in your game, you know?
Yeah.
There's something that wasn't right with, between me and my bow. I know I had an issue with my peep. I think my vision is starting to get bad as I get older. And, to topple that, I had some string twist problems, and I kept twisting it. And I wasn't going to change it right in the middle of season. Mm-hmm. And, it got pretty frustrating. But what I did was I went back home and I worked at it. I practiced. I try to make sure everything's on, you know, and just go out there and get back on the saddle and do it again, you know. And I do think that, where some people just get really frustrated, I do get in the mode where you kind of get like, this ain't going to happen to me, and I'm going to prove I can't do this. And I hunt harder, you know, I scout harder, I push harder. And, even though, I had all those failures last year, man, I sure got in the deer. You know, I was on them like crazy.
It was a silver lining. Yeah. What about the opposite situation from the one we're kind of talking about, where you have a bad run of luck and you either miss some bucks or just can't get them on them all season? What about the opposite? You just kind of mentioned it in passing a second ago, where you fill your tag really early. You kill on opening day, maybe. You kill your buck September 15th, and it's a 1 buck state. And yeah, maybe you can do an out-of-state trip, but most people can't go out of state for 2 months or 3 months or whatever. How would you recommend, or I guess what would you do to make the most of your time over the coming weeks and months after you've filled that tag and you've taken your out-of-state trip? What specifically could you do in a season like that?
Well, for me, I can't just, I'm a different breed, and I just can't go out and just hunt those. It just ain't in me. I love shooting them when they come by while I'm out hunting or whatever, but I just can't bring myself to go out and be a doe hunter. So what I like to do is I do the out-of-state trips, and then when I'm not doing out-of-state trips, I'm either scouting or I'm taking friends hunting. I love to put guys that I know on bucks or guys that I know are having a hard time. I just randomly say, hey, you want to go hunting? And I take them out and put them somewhere and help get a deer. And I feel really good about that. But the scouting is really key because there's not too often that you have time where you can go scout during season and look at those beds while they're being used and not have to worry, you know. So go in and scout those bedding areas right during season and look at what's going on. Can really teach you a lot more than looking at them 2 months later after season, you know?
Yeah. So is the best thing to do to literally boots on ground, hit all your good stuff in season to see exactly what's happening? Or do you have to worry, or does observation factor at all into the type of scouting you want to do in season too? Because I mean, there's value in watching too. Do you try to balance that at all, or what are your thoughts there?
Sure, but you know, not as much. But I do glass a little bit after my tags are filled. But I really like to just get in and look at the bedding areas too, and see what's being used and what's not at specific time frames.
Okay.
You know, kick a nice deer out of something and look at it where you really wouldn't want to do that in season otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I hope that I have a year like that someday. I haven't had one yet where I've got a whole bunch of season left where I don't have a tag to scout a bunch. I somehow always find myself still chasing my tail around. But one of these years, I hope to put that into practice. But speaking of the end of things, 2 final questions before I let you get back to your evening, Dan. 2 scenarios of sorts. Here's the last one. And we talked about this a little bit, that being the fact that, right, there's more people that hunt like you do now than probably ever before because of the media you put out, because of podcasts like this one, because of all these other things where people are talking about how to hunt in a mobile fashion, how to key in on bedding areas, how to be aggressive. It's a different world now than it was in 2005. So what if I were to tell you, and you've kind of had a situation like this if you look at the public land challenges where there's a bunch of guys that kind of hunt like you, but let's say that we're hunting one piece of public land, we'll say it's pretty big, but there's a bunch of guys that hunt like you. There's a bunch of really good beast mode deer hunters, like a lot more of us are dealing with now. We're all dealing with more effective hunters. What are you doing now differently in that scenario than you had to do 10 or 15 years ago? Because everyone's doing it like this.
Welcome to my life. Especially around my house. I mean, You got to remember where I live is all marsh terrain, and those original marsh hunting DVDs, especially that Blood Brothers one, I probably sold 25, 30,000 of those videos around here.
Wow.
It used to be all the islands out here and stuff were all pretty much mine. And now there's trails going out to them. There's guys hunting on them every weekend and stuff. And what happens is the deer change, and you have to adapt with them. So deer are still here. It's just that pressure puts them in different spots. So you got to find the spots that are a little more hidden, a little more overlooked, a little more off to the side. And you got to work a little harder. The good part is usually the pressure from those guys puts those deer in pretty specific spots. I mean, there's very little spots that aren't getting hit anymore. And that's where they're at, and another good thing is it used to be on public land. Every guy you ran into shot any deer they saw, because your so-called good hunters were all hunting private land, which there's people now that have private land that really would rather hunt on public, which kind of is surprising that people are tending that route. But I'm running into a lot better hunters on public than I used to. A lot more knowledgeable guys, guys doing it the right way, and some pretty cool hunters. But they are infiltrating all the spots I used to hunt. Yeah. So I just I have to up my game and figure out the deer a little better.
Can you describe an example of what that less obvious spot might be like? Let's say like the obvious stuff is what we learned about in that first DVD, which is your islands in a marsh or a point extending out into a marsh. Like everyone knows that now. So if that's obvious to most guys or girls, what would be the Dan Infalt pro move? Now, maybe you don't want to give this away. Maybe you need to hold this one back, Dan. But what's like that off the beaten path adjustment now that's where you have to adjust to?
Well, they're still betting on the points, little islands, things like that, but they're betting on ones that aren't as obvious. You can't see them as well on a map. Sometimes you got to get your eyes on to really see what's going on. Spots you find that you really can't see unless you walk them. So you go through there in winter. I'm still not seeing many guys doing the winter scouting. For how many guys I'm seeing out there on the islands and stuff, it's pretty impressive. But I go out there in winter, spring, I'm not seeing people. So people still aren't adapting in that manner very well. But they are hunting the obvious stuff that they didn't used to hunt. So putting some boots on the ground and really scouring those transitions. I've found a lot of really, really good stuff that's like thick transitions with mixed dogwood and tamarack stuff that slowly mixes into cattails and stuff. And there's a point, but it's really hard to see. And you get in there and you find this little hole that's perfect for a deer, but you really couldn't see it unless you walked in there and looked at it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those spots have really paid off a lot more.
Nice. I can envision a spot just like that on a place I hunt that I've kind of discovered something similar. So it's interesting you say that. Okay. Here's my last one, Dan. You've been a good sport. Thank you for for tackling all these various ideas that I'm sending your way. But here's the last one. I'm an asshole, and I am going to take away your hunting rights for all of the next 10 years, Dan. You can't hunt at all for 10 years. Unless this coming season you're able to kill a 4.5-year-old or older buck. But I'm only going to give you 1 day to do it. You've got 1 day to save the next 10 years of your hunting life. What day are you going to choose for that very high stakes hunt? And then, with as much detail as you can possibly describe the ideal spot you are going to hunt on that specific day to kill this buck that's going to save your next 10 years.
Probably December 31st.
Wow.
And probably going to hunt at a food source that I've been glassing.
Interesting. I would have not have expected that late season. So, okay, give me a little more detail on this. So you've been glassing a food source. It's super late season. How are you setting up on this food source on December 31st that you've been glassing?
So what I found is the most patternable time to kill a mature buck in daylight is right at the end of our season up here. If you're talking Wisconsin, I think it changes if you get to the south because of the warmer weather. But usually that coincides with us getting really cold. And usually right about the last week of the season here, it just really gets on fire and there's nobody else out there. But it is feast or famine. So you're either in the deer or you're not. But if you drive around, you scout a lot, you go check a lot of spots, you'll find a spot where a lot of deer are congregating and there'll be some big bucks in there. And it takes watching them from a distance to kind of pinpoint and then make a move. And I haven't killed a ton of bucks doing that, mainly because I'm usually tagged out at that time of the year. But I put some of my friends on some really good ones, and I have tagged a few at that time frame and had a lot of fun trying. There are some downfalls. Like I can remember a couple of years back when I was onto a group of deer that were feeding in some dogwood, and they'd show up every night. And I was using a human access trail to get back here, and I climb up a tree right along that access, and people would walk that trail during the day, once or twice a week, and deer were used to human scent on it. And I would get in there, and these bucks would start coming out, and there's at least 3 deer in the 160s, and one big 10-pointer I really wanted to shoot. And I finally got that deer right underneath me, and he came walking right under the base of my tree and got out to about 10 or 11 yards and turned quartering away and turned his head facing the other way as I drew. And I'm like, I got him. And right when I came to full draw, I heard a snort beside me, and an 8-pointer had spotted me in the tree.
Oh, no.
And as I squeezed the trigger, the 10-pointer jerked to run, and luckily I completely missed him because of dropping the string. But that's the downfall, is you have a lot of deer around, you have a lot of eyes on you, and there's no cover in the trees.
Yeah.
But it is probably the best time to shoot a mature buck is at the end of the season. And you can drive around in a car in any parking lot during a soul in the woods, especially if it gets down to like 10 degrees. Mm-hmm. But man, are the deer out.
Well, that is a good answer. It's not what I was expecting, so I like a little surprise here at the end, Dan. That's good stuff. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you playing along with this idea, and I learned some new things here today about you, which is cool. For people listening that want to get more from you, who want to see your videos or read your forum or follow along with anything you've got going on or any of your different products and things like that, what do you want people to know about? Where should they go?
I got a great YouTube page that's got some really good videos of the hunts that I do. You can follow me on Facebook. I tell some cool stories there. You can communicate with me there.
Yeah, I do like the stories.
I have a website called thehuntingbeast.com. That's a forum base. And I sell climbing sticks, and I'm going to have a lot in stock at the end of next month.
Perfect.
Beast sticks that everybody's looking for.
And what's the website to find the sticks?
Huntingbeastgear.com.
Perfect. All right. Dan, you passed the What Would You Do challenge with flying colors.
It was fun. It was fun.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too. So if we enjoyed it, that's all that matters, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, Dan. Well, thank you, and best of luck. I hope that you don't have one of those seasons where it's mid-November and you're still trying to figure out what to do.
In an ideal situation, you pound it all year and you shoot your buck on December 31st and the last day.
There is nothing sweeter than that. You're right. That is the slow build. That's the slow build.
Right.
All right, Dan. This has been great. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
And that's going to do it. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Make sure to check out all the rest of Dan's content across the Hunting Beast and elsewhere. And as I mentioned at the top, listen to the other episodes that we have with Dan Infalt. They're really good. They cover different ground than what we covered today. And honestly, even if you already listened to it, it might be worth re-listening to. With this new information in your head, I think stuff will start to make more sense. So check it out. Search for Dan Infalt. He's been on a bunch. They're all great. So with that said, thanks for listening. Good luck with your summer scouting, or if it's during the hunting season when you're listening to this, good luck with your hunting. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.